I think the maximum ethyl oleate you can use is 0 milligrams or 0%. That would be the ideal scenario.
Back to the cycle review section. So this one I just wanted, it's a short one. Mika said, thoughts on test-only cycles after the first one. Can you keep improving if all the other variables are on point? What do you guys think?
Bostin, take it away.
I'll let Steve answer that one.
Oh, for me first? Okay. Well, I love test-only cycles. It seems to be the easiest to manipulate health and blood work. Keep that in range with myself and most of my clients. It's available as a pharmaceutical, so you don't have to worry about the synthetic carrier oils. And then all you have to do really is manage hair loss if occurring, or manage acne if occurring. And gynecomastia is very easy to manage just by keeping your estrogen in range. But of course, you can still get hormonal fluctuations contributing to acne. And if you convert a lot to dehydrated testosterone, then of course you have to manage that with another ancillary medication. So I feel that if you slowly increase your strength, slowly increase your calories, and slowly increase your testosterone over the course of like 2 years, you can look phenomenal.
I agree.
Phenomenal. And I've reproduced this with clients maybe hundreds of times. Yeah, they come to me because they want to do test only. They're not interested in Primo or Boldenone or Trembolone or Masterone or Nandrolone. So we just handicap it. Test, calories, and progressive overload. And they look great. Do they have phenomenally thin skin? No, you need a little bit goodies on top. But for the off-season, I wrote an entire ebook about this called the Off-Season Cycles with Bioidentical Hormones. I'll send it to you, Bostin, also, so you can give me your honest feedback. It's just using test GH insulin.
Yeah, well, that's of course, but you bring in a lot more variables there. But just the test, we can say, as long as you don't overload yourself in the beginning. If you start with 2 grams, there isn't that far for you to go, and you'll stop getting the same results from testosterone eventually. But if you start with, like Bostin recommends, 500 milligrams of test or something like that, and you increase it by 250 every 3-4 months or something like that, just like Steve said, it'll get testosterone. In my opinion, testosterone will get you strong and large. You just won't have that shape, and it won't get horny. Yeah, that too, of course. Well, but the problem with that, you desensitize to it, and then if you're using very high doses, it becomes difficult when you lower the dose. What do you think, Boss? You can keep progressing on test for a while?
I'm with Leo on that. So test is going to build muscle, so you're going to have a bigger bodybuilder. So like Steve said, if you continually to just bring the test up when you need to, when you hit a plateau, 100%, you'll continue to grow. But most people that don't have those dry genetics with their physiques, they could continue to put on muscle with tests, but they're not going to have the greatest hardness. They're not going to have the greatest, and then that's when things come in, like adding Primo in would help, adding something like EQ. So it'll 100% put on lean muscle, but it's not going to give you that polished look by any means.
Exactly. And also you won't gain muscle as fast as if you used like half the test and combine and made the rest out of NPP or EQ or something like that. Obviously. Yeah. But you still
need something for synergy.
Yeah, the synergy, just like you said, Steve, with the growth hormone and insulin. So there's a bit of a longer one. AW Fitness Lover says this will be awesome. So my cycle: 750 tests, 600 EQ, 300 NPP, and AI twice a week, keeping estrogen at 40 for recomp. He said, is there any benefit for the muscular gain of NPP at 300? Should I drop NPP and up the test to 1,000 from 750? What do you guys think? This would be a 20-week cycle. What do you think, Boston?
Okay, well, this cycle is something that I've designed for many of my clients. I love this. I love 750 tests, 600 EQ, 300 NPP. If his estrogen is at 40, using an anti-estrogen twice a week, I would bring it up to 3 times a week. I would want it a little lower. I would do a half mg 3 times a week on the cycle, or half mg every other day
to get less side effects.
Yeah, get the estrogen down lower than 40. The only problem that I do not like about this cycle is he's saying that it would be a 20-week cycle. I wouldn't run this cycle longer than 8 weeks personally.
You'll adapt to the compounds, right?
And we'll switch compounds. For instance, if he's shooting all these compounds 3 times a week, let's say if he's doing 250 tests, 250 tests, and then like 200 EQ, and then 100 MPP every other day, or 3 times a week, I would switch the cycle in 8 weeks.
So like Primo or something, like switch the EQ.
Correct. I would even switch the test esters from like Sust, or if he was using Test E, I would switch them to SIP, and I would replace EQ with something like DHB or DECA, and then I would replace the NPP with maybe something like Masteron and Enthate or something like that.
Good points. What about you, Steve?
I would start a little bit lower dosages and just, again, build up your dosages as you stagnate, because during a recomp, he's probably in a caloric restrictive state, but he should still get a little bit of a muscle memory in the beginning of starting a cycle, assuming that he's starting a cycle and he's not coming from one cycle to the other, or doing a cruise in between, right? So the starting point also determines where he's at. And maybe start a little bit lower, then increase or switch compounds as required. Right? Yeah. I don't think it's, let's say he's coming from a cruise on 250 milligrams of testosterone, and he jumps into the cycle with his 1600 milligrams off the bat, might also induce some side effects. And maybe it might be better to keep the estrogen a little bit lower, maybe 25 picograms per milliliter, or change the ratio between testosterone to boldenone, because boldenone also has some properties to keep estradiol conversion to a minimum. So maybe 700 tests, or let's say 500 tests, 500 boldenone, 200 NPP or 100 NPP, and then just adjust based on that.
Yeah, but it just depends what his recent gear history is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If he's been high dosages for years, that's not going to do much.
No, of course. So there's so many factors that contribute, and it's caloric intake, and but it does look like a solid cycle. But maybe after a couple of weeks, he needs to change it. You know, I personally don't believe in changing the esters around, because I feel that everybody has a unique response to particular esters. Because the esterases, everybody has like a little different profile on how they metabolize the enanthate or the endocyanate or the propionate. That's why some guys respond very well to propionate and not very well to enanthate, because their physiological esterases are different.
If that's true, but I'm just hypothesizing, but even the liver enzymes that metabolize these things, they react to us using the drugs, so that potentially Bostin may be right. I'm like you, Steve. I don't believe in changing the ester of testosterone, but when you were talking about it just now, I realized there is a metabolism of the esters also that could be adapted to. So Bostin might be right.
That's why I changed up. And you know who I learned that from was Mike Arnold. A lot of these top guys switch up things, and you know, like I said, I can't tell you anything scientifically, but it just makes sense to me that if you're using one ester of something for a while, your body's going to get used to it and to switch it up. I'm big on that. Like I'll do like cypionate for 6 to 8 weeks, propionate for 6 to 8 weeks, Sustana, you know what I mean? And you know, so and that's a big difference too.
But the way to synopsize what Steve said is, and I wish this could become a slogan of the channel: you can always take more drugs. You can't untake what you're taking. So if you start at 750, you can always start at 350 and go to 500, then go to 750. So there's never any harm in starting lower. You know, you can just extend it a little bit, and then go ahead.
Yeah, it's also about being patient, you know, because if you go on testosterone enanthate and within the 2 weeks, first 2 weeks, you're not very happy with the results, well, serum concentrations are still building. So give it a month.
That's
you know, I know guys that every 2 weeks I'm going to bump up the dose. So it's not even building up, you know, like it's like hyperbolic, you know, that you're increasing the dose now.
So the other thing about estrogen being low, of course, I don't like that personally because I'm interested in estrogen for health effects, but there's clear, valid reason for this here, because as you know, NPP will be signaling at the progesterone receptor, and then you have the estrogen a bit higher, so that will raise your prolactin more. Prolactin raises from estrogen and progesterone signaling. And the final thing I want to mention, his question about MPP, I would never, if your goal is for the muscle recomp and that stuff, I would never raise the test to 1,000 and remove the MPP. Here you have a matrix going on. We don't know exactly what EQ does exactly, but we know there's something progestogenic here. And if you remove that, progesterone is the anabolic female hormone. So when you remove that, you dramatically will reduce the benefits of the cycle. Plus,
like if he did like 1,500 tests and EQ, his physique would look way better with lower tests with that added NPP.
Yeah.
And probably gain muscle more as well.
Yeah.
So this guy, IKC, says, why do long esters consistently seem to give worse side effects than the same milligram of short esters? So what do you think about that, Steve? Do they? Because short esters often have more solvents.
You said long esters give worse side effects, right? So I think it's just injection frequency. People think that because they're going enanthate or cypionate or undecionate or undecilonate, that they can get away with once a week, twice a week injections. But it's still within 1 or 2 days, a large portion of the active pharmaceutical ingredient is absorbed from the injection depot, regardless of carrier oil being used. So if you inject a lower dose a little bit more frequently, maybe treat your enantate or cypionate as a propionate or acetate, and inject every other day or every day, you get very stable serum concentrations. And then the side effects just kind of go away.
What do you think, Boston?
Well, yeah, so long esters consistently seem to give worse side effects, probably due to that overlapping, like it building up in your system. You know what I mean? So
That also be the case. Yeah.
that's probably why if you get side effects on tren acetate, you probably will get worse side effects on tren enanthate. That's just how it goes, because it's something that it kind of builds up in your system, and then when you come off of it, it takes longer to get out of your system, so you're gonna have the side effects longer too.
Yeah, especially tren enanthate.
But yeah, that's my answer to that.
So he says he's planning to brew a 50-50 Trenese Masteron prop test prop blend for use for his next context prep. He is asking Steve, because Steve knows a lot about carrier oils, and solvents. What's the maximum ethyl oleate percentage I should use, and which carrier oil will have the least probability of tren cough or other negative side effects? I know he's not a fan of grapeseed oil. What do you think?
I'm a fan of grapeseed oil because it's organic.
I thought you were, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, grapeseed, cottonseed, it's all good with me. Anything organic is fine, besides arachi's oil, which is refined peanut oil and can still cause inflammation. I think the maximum ethyl oleate you can use is 0 milligrams or 0%. That would be the ideal scenario. Right, so a lot of these underground labs, they say grapeseed oil, right? At the excipients, or they say excipients quantity sufficient, which is a red flag. You should avoid those labs. So if they say grapeseed oil, they might also add in 10 milligram or 10%, 20% of ethyl oleate plus 20% benzyl benzoate, and then 2 to 5% benzo alcohol. So
So ethyl oleate is the one you'd get away from the most out of those solvents.
I would stay away from anything synthetic. Ethyl oleate I would not use. I would rather use 30% benzyl benzoate, which doesn't cause systemic inflammation and is being used in pharmaceutical compounds. But ethyl oleate is only approved here in Asia. And I just see...
Ethyl oleate can't be healthy. That shit eats my rubber stoppers up.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why it's all produced in ampules. And because the ampules is glass, right? So you can't see that it's dissolving the stopper. But I've used pharmaceutical grade products here in Asia in ethyl oleate. And you preload your syringes. And then from the third injection onwards, the rubber is just dissolving. You see like little chunks just slowly going.
That should happen. One of these sources sent me some ethyl oleate because it helps with the pain with shots. So I would, when I was using painful stuff, I'd put like a half cc ethyl oleate and then microwave it for a little bit to mix it. Dude, that shit ate through like the rubber stopper at top. It got fat. It literally turned fat, and it was so bad.
It's like a pumped pussy. That's what it
looks. Yeah, it looks like a pumped pussy. Exactly.
And the propylene glycol and the migliol and all that stuff, your glycol, it all does the same thing to the stopper. So if it does that to the stopper, imagine what it's doing to the inside of your body.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Yeah, it's solving your
body. And now people think, I can use it for side enhancement. I get that pump pussy effect in my biceps.
That's not the way to go. Okay, so This guy says it's his first AAS cycle. He's only done SARMs before. He seems to be a hyper responder, and therefore his dosages he's planned aren't particularly high. Now, Boston, he wants to comment on this. He wants to take as a first cycle 4 months of 250 test E, and then in the last... he says after the first 8 weeks, he wants to use 10 to 20 milligrams of the Balkan Anavar, which is a potent Anavar. He says he'll be cutting and he wants to look like Z's, although he says this is a bit cringe. And then he said, I forgot to mention, it's also for well-being and energy during university, and I'm 22. So, some of you, what a nice guy. He said nice things to us, boss. So what do you think, Boston, about using 250 as the first cycle?
So the 250 test, I would never ever have anyone do anything under. I know Steve will disagree, but
that's what I did.
I just don't understand that. Like, I don't get it.
I don't get it either.
Yeah. Like if
you were gonna use 250,
if you're old as fuck, like 50, 60, you'll get a benefit from it. But if you're like 20s and 30s, you may get a little bit of benefit from it, but not enough to justify not being natural. You know what I mean? Like I would at least run 500 tests, but I wouldn't run it like for 20 weeks or whatever, like he's saying. And then the Anavar, I don't know. I 10 mgs of Anavar for a dude. I don't know.
Now say he's a hyper responder. In that case, brother, Vax Granatin, why don't you, instead of injecting testosterone, you don't even mention using HCG. So you're about to cut off all supply to your gonads from your brain. You're going to tell your balls to shut down for 4 months, bro. You're never going to fully recover from that, by the way. But let me comment, if you're going to do that, why didn't you use HCG first? If you're such a hyper responder, if you use a bit of HCG, you'll get that 250 tests a week just from the HCG, and you don't lose your balls.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
No, I did this with many
You're
of my
probably
clients
right.
that are.
You probably get better gains off of HCG every other day.
Yeah. And the incentive to spread the love around, because HCG is a natural, makes you freaking horny.
Of course, yeah, because it's naturally around your gonads. And then you could, if you're on HCG, you could take that Anavar. You wouldn't lose any because you're replacing the signal to your gonads. You could try the Anavar as your first cycle by itself.
Well, the problem is still the Anavar will downregulate the HP. Right, the first 2 steps.
Yeah, it will down. So, it will affect the hypothalamus, but then you're just having a gap from your brain to your balls, but your balls are still working.
Yeah, so, that's the most important part.
Yeah, because that part is quicker to recover.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I would, let's say he does the ACG first, like 4 weeks. You know, I mentioned that protocol on my YouTube channel where you do 100 IUs ACG for 1 week, 3 times per week for 1 week, and then you bump it to 250 and then 500 and 1,000, and you just see where you feel good. You do your blood work, see what the potential is of your testosterone, and then base your cycle, like your testosterone based on that, because you want to be over of what you can produce naturally. But maybe you can only produce, 500 nanograms per deciliter natural, and then 250 milligrams of test is going to be double of what he's producing.
Now, it depends on how quickly he metabolizes the testosterone. If he's a quick metabolizer like myself, it might not do much for you. But what you could do, brother, is you could go do a blood test, check your testosterone level and your luteinizing hormone. If your luteinizing hormone is like an 8 or a 9, you might not get out of much out of a regular HCG dose. But if your luteinizing hormone is a 6 or a 7 or a 5, and you have your testosterone level, then all you got to do is the next week or 2 weeks later. Now, Steve disagrees on dosages for HCG than I do. What I would use is 1,500 units minimum every other day, and then I would get my blood work tested in 2 weeks or so, and see what my testosterone level is. If it's outshot my last testosterone level, then I know I'm more than replacing LH. So now I'm going super physiologic, and then I can choose from that dose. Okay, 1,000 or 1,000 units or 1,500 replace my test. Now I can do a cycle of 2,500, something like that, But my point is, I agree with Boston. I mean, now if you're already on HCG and you're not sacrificing your balls, then I could understand using even 100 milligrams of testosterone in addition. But if you're sacrificing your balls for that, I don't get it.
Leo, so the HCG, I don't think you would get much results if you run it at a super low dose. I think the 1,500 every other day or 3 times a week. But now, would you run a slight anti-estrogen every like 0.25 mix of Arimidex every shot?
You'd have to, because around your Leydig and Sertoli cells in your gonads, there's a lot of aromatase expression. So that's why when you take HCG, a lot of the testosterone produced converts to estrogen much more than elsewhere in your body. So if you were trying to get benefits from this, you'd have to limit that estradiol in your blood test. So what you do is you take a certain amount of an aromatase inhibitor. Then on that first blood test, you check your estradiol and try to get it back below 40, between 20 and 40. So that way the HCG actually has its impact of being able to raise your testosterone.
It doesn't downregulate the LH and FSH response.
Exactly.
I feel like the aromatase inhibitor would also help you raise your natural free testosterone levels as well during the process.
Well, you're already replacing the signal from your brain, but it would help you prevent more like dysfunction in your brain, like Steve was saying, from the hypothalamus estrogen receptors, for sure. So, what the hell? Okay, so Randy says, next cycle for building steady lean mass, I'll be using 2 units of GH every other day that's a great approach to lessen metabolic syndrome or insulin insensitivity from the GH. So first 4 weeks he's doing test E350. He's always doing weeks 1 through 10 is 350 test. He switches from D-ball to T-ball, which should not be milligram per milligram the same. Maybe you're taking too much Danabol. And then Mastron 200, and he switches to Primo 200. And then later he raises the test and raises the Primo and drops the oral. And then he says he'll be following Steve's electrolyte protocol for his GH, as well as trying to stay around 10 to 12% body fat. He mixed Primo and Mast with the orals to contain the water retention and estrogen during the cycle. What do you guys think about this?
I would switch it around. Start with the test in Primo, and then add in the turinabol, then add in the dianabol at the end to get like past the plateau. You know, the dosages would change obviously, but you can make a lot of progress on 350 test and 200 on 350 Primo. And then, you know, when you start to stagnate, maybe you throw in an oral on top. That's usually how I finish most of the off seasons. An oral for 4 weeks to really, you know, set a new baseline in strength and really push past the plateaus. And you know, most times after orals, you don't really feel like eating anymore anyway, even with the anabol. And then you call it quits. Your off season is over.
What do you think, Boston?
The only cycle out of this that I would ever have anyone do is that the D, week 11 through 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here are my what are you going to say something, Boston?
Yeah, okay. So he's only going to be on fucking Mastron for 4 weeks. Who knows if it's Mastron and Enthate, and who knows if it's Mastron propionate? Is he shooting it twice a week, or is he shooting it every other day? It's hard to really give but the only cycle that I don't ever recommend is the D one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my thought was I would never use Dianabol at 40 milligrams every day for 4 weeks. That is a highly liver toxic compound that does cause liver cancers, has done so in the past. It has a high residence time in the liver, and it is potently androgenic. It is very dangerous. If you do use Dianabol or something like that weeks in a row, you better be a bodybuilder and going to competition. And in that case, to be honest, you'll be running Anadrol because you'll be wanting to hold, retain glycogen, all this kind of stuff. So, in my opinion, that should never be done more than 2 days in a row or more than 4 days a week. If you're going to do days on a row, and it should be on your workout days, if anything. Then the turinabol, I've never used it, but I know it's far weaker than Dianabol. So the order of these drugs is a little off. And really, if anything, I would rather mix the turinabol in the same weeks with the Dianabol so I don't adapt to the Dianabol, so I can use it much longer. So I could use my Dianabol on my hardest days and turinabol on the other days, maybe, for example.
I would still do that, maybe 20 milligrams Dianabol and 40 milligrams turinabol. I feel like it's half as potent on a milligram for milligram basis.
I mean, I used at the end of my lifting, honestly, when I used to use Anadrol, I would use 50 milligrams. But when I used Dianabol, I would use, of course, I was using like the Tide, the pink ones, but I was using 20 milligrams. Yeah, really, 20 milligrams was enough to get a big thing out of the workout. And then,
I know.
And then the Mastron and the Primo, personally, I don't like to add those things to deal with estrogen. If you're adding them to be harder and look good, that's one thing. But if you're trying to deal with estrogen, deal with estrogen. Use aromatase inhibitor. That's it'll affect your bloat, I think. Also, these probably have effects on the mineralocorticoid receptors, because when I use an AI with Dianabol, I'm still a bit bloated. Do you guys notice that?
For sure, yeah.
For sure. You're not going to ever avoid that.
It's
because
weird.
What is it? The methyl estradiol is far more potent and less subject to metabolization, so it stays in the system far longer. That's why I don't like the Dianabol kickstart. I mean, just be patient and then let everything build up over 4 weeks, because it will take a while before muscle memory kicks in and all the metabolic processes really starts when you go back on a proper cycle. So just be patient. Take the Dianabol if you want to take it at the end to push you past plateaus. And because it is liver toxic and very androgenic at certain points, you want to take some time off and address your health afterwards. That's why I never do orals in the beginning. I always do orals last. There's a coach out there that recommends halo testing at the beginning of a cycle. Boston, do you know about this?
No, I did not. Is he a well-known coach?
He's very well known.
Oh. Really? Never heard of that.
I heard several of his clients say, I never understood why this coach wants to do halo in the beginning. And he would just say, just get some androgens in you.
What are his initials? What are his initials?
CA.
CA. Okay. Oh, wow. I know that's obvious to me, but that's shocking to me.
That's what I talked to several of his clients, and they all said the same thing. I don't understand what a halo testing is in the beginning. Makes me feel like shit.
He's not good with anabolics, though. Like he shoots in the dark with that. He's more of a nutrition.
Probably, yeah. But yeah, he's very good with nutrition. His clients obviously win. It's just always surprising to me. I tried to do it with one client, but it didn't really work. It didn't really play out. So I do orals at the end, and then after that, there's a down period to address health, because they all detract from your health. to a certain extent.
So the Blood Lord is a huge support of the channel, Boston, and I really love this
That's
guy.
Derek, dude. That's the guy that does my pre-workout.
No way, he's awesome. I really like this guy, and he's been following for a while. So he says this is his current cycle for recomp cut. He has some nerve damage also from an arm injury. He says he's taking Test E 180 every 4 days. That's interesting. Thanks to Steve. And then he says he's taking T3 at 37.5 micrograms. He's taking 1.4 units of GH upon waking, fasted pre-workout. He's taking 700 micrograms of frag, which Boston, last episode you mentioned 250 before workouts, but he's doing it pre-bed in a huge dose.
Yeah, let's switch that around, the GH and the frag.
Right? I know, that's exactly right. So is the frag too much of a dose in one time, Boston?
100%.
It's a waste, right? Okay.
I would say the max dose in one dose you want to do is 500 mcgs.
Yeah.
Bro, what in the world is TB? 5 milligram every 4 days.
TB 500, I guess.
Oh,
tuberculosis.
Okay, so I didn't know what it is. I was like tuberculosis. Anyway.
Yeah. So, thymus and beta.
Oh, he's taking TB and BPC 500. Yeah. So he's using this in his arm, I guess, to regrow the nerves. Well, that's not the best way to do that for sure.
No,
and then, I mean, it is probably useful, but not the best way. And then Cialis, 25 milligrams Monday through Friday. Attempting to acquire 5. No, bro, you get a diamond scale and you cut the pill up. You can do that easily. You don't have to mega dose this drug, which is really ineffective.
You said diamond scale and not cocaine scale.
Yeah, we call it a diamond scale. I don't use cocaine. So anyway, further elaboration. He said, I've resigned myself to full hormone replacement, generally use 25 micrograms of T3 and 100 micrograms of LT4. GH and frag are as such because each vial provides 7 days at those doses. I use frag in the evening because I use GH, and I selected GH for fast training. Okay, so what do you guys think about this?
Oh, it's I've helped Eric before with his diets and stuff, but this is never. This is a kind of bizarre cycle, but I'll let Steve say.
So I like the testosterone inundating castor oil because it has a much more stable serum concentrations, and castor oil stays in the depot a little bit longer. So every injections every 4 days sufficient, and he's clearly not using an aromatase inhibitor. So I'm assuming that his testosterone and estradiol concentrations are good, and his inflammatory markers are basically 0.1, 0.5 milligrams per liter on the high sensitivity C-reactive protein. I do feel that this thyroid is a little bit too high for the dose of testosterone that he's on. I would just do replacement, or maybe look into Armor Thyroid. What is it, 25 micrograms T4 and 12.5 micrograms T3. It's probably sufficient. Really, T3 you don't want to overdo when you're on hormone replacement. Assuming this is a generous hormone replacement for bodybuilders, so that would be what, 200. Let's say it's 250 a week, 250 milligrams of test. I would not do 37.5 micrograms of T4 plus 100 micrograms of 37.5 micrograms T3 and maybe, T4
it's a low
on
androgen
top.
Dose, basically. It's a very low androgen.
Yeah, it's too low. Yeah, it's too low. And of course, the growth hormone will add in a little bit of anabolism on top. But I mean, if he's trying to improve connective tissue health, then the T3 is also not going to help because it's probably going to be catabolic in connective tissue. So the TB500 and the BPC is not really going to shine. The growth hormone is fine. I would still take it before bed to increase IGF-1 and improve sleep. And take the frag 250, 500 at maximum before fasted cardio to improve lipolysis. And then the TB500 and the BPC, I would do maybe 500 micrograms to a milligram per day on each, intramuscular as close to the site of injury as possible, and make sure you get your collagen protein with that.
Well, no, his injury is nerve damage, he says.
Oh, it's nerve damage, right? So for nerve damage, it's I would hand it over to Leo about brain-derived nootropic factor.
Yeah, so let's discuss this quickly. So the T3, now this is interesting. He mentioned before he used to use 100 micrograms of T4, and now the T4 is mysteriously missing here. So if you are somebody that's on thyroid replacement, you need the T4 to turn off your TSH. Your TSH does not respond to the T3 as well as the T4. But as you guys know, and the research shows, not a lot of the T4 is really converted into T3 when you supplement with it. So sometimes if you have a nice doctor, they'll give you Armor tremor thyroid, like Steve mentioned, or desiccated thyroid, or you could just do exactly what you were doing before, which is 100 micrograms of T4 plus the 25 micrograms of T3. I also feel like now I have a client who's using 50 micrograms of T3 separated during the day, but it's really, when I do that, my heart rate really elevates.
Yeah.
And T3 agonizes the thyroid receptor alpha as well as the beta receptor, and the alpha receptor has effects on the cardiac muscle. And that's the main concern with using a lot of T3, so that's something to be concerned about. Just watch your heart rate, I think, and there's not medical advice, of course.
And raises sexual binding globulin concentrations. So and this dose of testosterone might be not high enough to keep that in a favorable range, and the longer he does that, it might suppress libido by binding up too much testosterone.
Bro, do you know speculating. Did you see what the messages I sent in the Derek group text?
Yeah.
So I just discovered that T3 and T4 are involved in hair development, in pigmentation, as well as, shockingly, T4 seems to inhibit TGF beta, that transforming growth factor beta that's part of the fibrosis in the scalp. So I had a new idea of topical T4 or topical GC1 to protect the hair from hair loss as well as graying of hair.
And
but anyway,
it might actually work, because even though the molecular weight of T4 and T3 is a little bit too high for transdermal absorption, but because you have so much follicles, it might just go in there. Again, just speculating, but it might just go through the follicles instead of the actual, what is it, epidermis, dermis?
I don't know, but I'm very curious, because the side effect profile, I mean, what is it going to be? It's going to be much lighter than these other things we're using.
For sure.
But so about I agree with Steve, of course, you're using the frag for fat loss. So you want to use that in the morning. The frag doesn't cause the insulin resistance as much, or I don't know how much it does, but definitely not as much as real GH. And you take the GH before bed because you're not eating while you're asleep. So you get the least insulin insensitivity. And then the TB and BPC, you're taking that there for angiogenesis and other growth factors. You could do a lot of things for that. But the thing that most would help is cerebrolysin, which actually has nerve growth factor in it directly. So you're injecting, instead of injecting something that promotes blood vessel formation that then brings about growth factors downstream, you're injecting the literal growth factors. And I personally inject my cerebrolysin in muscles that I'm trying to heal nerve damage in, actually. So I've seen a lot of, if you combine cerebrolysin with growth hormone, which I recently did because of my finger and because of another thing also, it is an incredible multiplicative effect. I mean, the way you sleep is unbelievable. It's doing something interesting.
I want to know if cerebrolysin has some PE benefits.
Yes. PE. Maybe. I know. I was just talking about
sensitivity. Sensitivity.
I was just talking about that with some. Okay, that was the last one.